But what GABA or gamma-aminobutyric acid does is it is acting like a brake on our nervous system. It calms us down. It brings us to a relaxed state of mind. In addition, it also has an anti-inflammatory property. It has an anti-hypertensive property, so it actually helps us reduce our blood pressure. So viewers, if you think you cannot calm down, you cannot sit, cannot relax, be in a moment, or if you see your children doing that, they just cannot calm down, it could be an issue with the levels of GABA or gamma aminobutyric acid. And it helps the infant digest the milk that is made by the mother. So this probiotic strain is very, very important. And just think that in infants, it is also helping them be calm and relaxed by getting enough good enough levels of GABA. Hello, everyone. Take a deep breath and relax because we are welcoming you to this super relaxing and calming episode on the new neurotransmitter, gamma aminobutyric acid. Here's my co host, Sujata Gokhale.
Hi
Welcome.
Rashmi, hello. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Yes, I'm very calm and relaxed. And let's begin our series. So, dear viewers, welcome to our series of podcasts on neurotransmitters. If you have missed out on the earlier episodes, please find the links in the description given below. So, in previous podcasts, we have discussed on how the gut microbiota generates metabolites that can potentially influence our mental and physical health. So, some of the commonly identified metabolites that the gut microbiome actually generates or produces are short chain fatty acids, bile acids, and then we have the neurotransmitters. Now, these are also used, there is a bidirectional communication pathway between the gut microbiota and the brain. So, there is that gut brain axis, which we call, which is also makes it known that our gut is like a second brain. It functions like a second brain. So, the gut microbiota and its metabolites impact host health through the brain and peripheral systems. Metabolites send signals to the brain via the vagus nerve or the blood brain barrier after crossing the intestinal barrier. Now, like Rashmi mentioned, this podcast, we will be talking about GABA, that is a mood regulator. GABA is produced both by the brain and by the gut, but a large quantity of it is produced in the gut. So, Rashmi, can you tell us what is GABA and how is it produced in our gut?
Yes, so this is a very different neurotransmitter that I said initially. We talked about in the first few episodes about serotonin, about melatonin. But what GABA or gamma aminobutyric acid does is it is acting like a brake on our nervous system. It calms us down. It brings us to a relaxed state of mind. It is doing a lot more things other than that also. But that's the most important function it is known for, that it is our calming hormone. So GABA and being in a calm and relaxed state is something that is very, very highly correlated. As you rightly said, it is made not just in the brain, but also in our gut by the gut microbiome. It was not known for a very long time that there are significant levels of GABA that are made in the gut as well. The other thing that is very interesting is that when anything is made in the gut, just like we mentioned, melatonin. Now, melatonin is also going to the bloodstream from our gut. Similarly, GABA also initially it was thought that it does not do anything in the brain. It cannot cross the blood-brain barrier. There were a lot of misconceptions about GABA, but recent studies have shown that to be untrue. It can actually do that. It is produced in the gut. It travels to the bloodstream. It goes to other organs as well. So it is functioning in all of these processes. So majority of this research on the gut microbiome is quite recent, that it is made in our gut, and it has a lot of important functions not just in the brain but also in our gut. So if we talk about the number of things that GABA does, it controls the fluid secretion in our intestine. It controls the mucus production in our intestine. You know how important that is for digestion of our food, for absorption of whatever we eat. So we need to have that intestinal fluid. We need to have all of those enzymes to digest our food properly. In addition, it also has an anti-inflammatory property. It has an anti-hypertensive property. So it actually helps us reduce our blood pressure. One way of doing
Mhm.
it is by putting us in that calm state of mind. That is a very big mechanism how it tends to reduce blood pressure. It has anti-cancer properties. It actually controls the proliferation of cancer cells that are, as we talked about in the previous podcast, cancer cells are always floating in our body. So it has a very good anti-cancer property. It also has very good, as I said, anti-inflammatory, which is very important for a lot of different chronic diseases to control inflammation. And if we talk about this calming function of GABA, the important thing to note here is that it is made from glutamate. So glutamate is glutamic acid. It comes from an amino acid which is present in our proteins. So GABA is known as a non-protein amino acid. It's very similar to other amino acids, but it does not get incorporated into proteins. So there's a fine balance between glutamate and GABA. So what GABA does is we need our neurons to be excited for certain phases, for certain things that are happening in our brain. But GABA acts as a control on it so that there's no uncontrolled thing. We'll talk more about that later, how that is balanced. But this function of calming somebody down is extremely important. So viewers, if you think you cannot calm down, you cannot sit, cannot relax, be in a moment, or if you see your children doing that, that they just cannot calm down, it could be an issue with the levels of GABA or gamma aminobutyric acid that are present in our gut, in our brain.
Yes,
So
Rashmi, like you mentioned, it's an inhibitory neurotransmitter and
yes,
also it's neuroprotective. So
yes,
just like you talked about serotonin and melatonin having to be, are associated with each other. Similarly, GABA, like you mentioned, is associated with the glutamate. So is it necessary that there has to be a balance between the two? What happens if the balance between glutamate and GABA is, disturbed? And if there are low or high or levels of GABA, does it impact our body? And do we develop neurological disorders?
yes. So that's a very interesting question. When we talk about the precursor, just like there's a balance, intricate balance of serotonin and melatonin that is required, there's a pair. So it is acting in a particular sequence. Similarly, glutamate is also a neurotransmitter. It is a precursor for gamma aminobutyric acid. There's an enzyme called GAD that is required for this kind of a conversion. That is
Mhm.
very, very important, and it comes from the gut microbiome. So when we talk about this balance, let us focus on what glutamate itself does. So glutamate is an excitatory neurotransmitter. It excites neurons. So exciting neurons is also required for learning, for memory formation, for other things that are happening in our brain. So, but too much of glutamate can lead to this overexcitement of neurons. It can lead to excitotoxicity. There is also an excitotoxicity. It can lead to overfiring of neurons, which can damage neurons, which can kill neurons. So there's a necessity to control this excitation. We cannot be in that excited state for too long. So in order to control that, this same glutamate is converted by this enzyme to GABA or gamma amino butyric acid, and this acts as a brake. So how interesting is that? The same precursor is exciting neurons, and what follows, the GABA that is made from it, is acting as a control. So it is the inhibitory neurotransmitter, as you rightly said. So when this is uncontrolled, when that glutamate is not converted properly, when that enzyme is missing, because that enzyme comes from the gut microbiome, if it is missing, there's too much glutamate and there is too little gamma aminobutyric acid. So this balance, as you rightly said, is very, very important. We can talk about many of the disorders that are associated with too much glutamate, too little gamma aminobutyric acid because of the missing enzyme, or because there's very less glutamate itself. It can be any of those two reasons. So there are diseases that are associated with it, that, because it involves so many neuroprotective functions. It also, GABA is also it has a good effect on regulating cholesterol levels. So that is something that I just remembered. If we look at the different disorders that are associated with low GABA levels, there are many that are linked to neurological and psychological diseases. So some of these include anxiety, panic disorders. So in people who suffer from these, there are insufficient GABA levels. This leads to increased anxiety, increased even stress response. How we respond to stress is also quite abnormal. Depression has been linked to lower levels of GABA. For example, the major depressive disorder that is linked to lower levels of GABA. Epilepsy again has reduced GABA, neurons that are responding to GABA, that has uncontrolled firing of neurons. So this is something that leads to seizures in people who are suffering from epilepsy. So GABA is quite dysregulated. People who are suffering from schizophrenia again have an imbalance in the glutamate versus GABA levels. GABA levels are lower in certain areas of the brain. If we talk about autism spectrum disorders, and now again children who are suffering from ASDs or even ADHD, the attention deficit disorder, hyperactivity disorder, those children also tend to have an imbalance in the GABA levels. If we are talking about Parkinson's, Alzheimer's disease, again, GABA levels are quite dysregulated. There are low levels of GABA in these conditions. If we talk about conditions that have high levels of GABA, now there are rare instances. This is very rare, but even that can occur, that GABA can be too much. So there are some disorders like chronic fatigue syndrome. There are some sedation and cognitive impairment disorders. So these are very, very rare, but these can have higher levels of gamma-aminobutyric acid. So this is what we see in many of the disorders. And of course, as I said before, it's not just one neurotransmitter, it's a balance of glutamate and GABA. It's a balance of serotonin and melatonin. It's a balance of all other neurotransmitters that are functioning in coordination, in combination with each other in all of these disorders.
Interestingly, even epilepsy is linked to
Yes.
GABA levels, I believe, right,
Yes, so
Rashmi?
seizures happen because of overfiring of neurons because the GABA levels are not controlled. So these
Mhm.
neurons are firing excessively, and that can lead to seizures. So GABA levels really need to be looked into in people who are suffering from seizures, in epilepsy
Really,
especially.
really very great information there, Rashmi. So, I mean, we can see that this particular neuroprotective transmitter that is developed in our gut. So there is a relation between the gut microbiota and the GABA production. We can see that because since it's happening in the gut, and there is that correlation between what is happening with the GAD enzymes to create convert glutamate into GABA. So we therefore we can assume that nutrition does naturally play a big role in our the GABA production. So it's a common knowledge that foods, especially fermented foods, have probiotic properties and can help GABA because of their ability to express GAD genes. So that means the nutrition, which plays an important role for maintaining the GABA level. So, do you recommend that we have include fermented foods more? Because this is a very interesting combination, between the GABA production and the fermented foods. We have been endorsing fermented foods, but do you really think there is a link between the two?
So this question is so interesting on many different levels. In the first episode of this neurotransmitter series, now I'm going to address it in three different points at least. In the first episode, we talked about how fermented foods have led to this cognitive improvement in humans, the increase in brain size that is 3 times more than our primate counterparts, and how we tend not to include fermented foods these days. So when we look at what is happening, let's take a step back now from the fermented foods to focus on what is happening in our gut. This enzyme, glutamate decarboxylase or GAD, is coming from the gut microbiome. There are certain microorganisms that have this enzyme. It's not ours. We don't have the genes for that. So converting glutamate to GABA requires an enzyme that comes from microorganisms, not our enzymes. So for that, we need those specific microorganisms, which means that we need a very good quality microbiome for it. Now, if we see which are the strains, getting a little bit technical here, but bacteroids, lactobacillus, bifidobacterium, these are three strains, that are three bacterial genera that are very, very important for producing this enzyme. So this enzyme is going to help us get good enough levels of GABA, which means that we need to have a good gut microbiome. Interestingly, if you look at bacteroids, there's a very interesting study that has shown that when bacteroid levels are normal, it leads to normal GABA levels. When bacteroid levels are low, it leads to something called a depressive syndrome because of low levels of GABA, because bacteroids are producing that enzyme which is required for production of GABA. Similarly, if we look at all the fermented, the most common fermented foods, yogurt, for example, which strains do most of the yogurt that we get have? They are lactobacilli or bifidobacterium. So, what do? They have this enzyme that is converting glutamate to GABA. Bifidobacterium, interestingly, is the probiotic strain that is very important in infants. Bifidobacterium comes from the mother and it helps the infant digest the milk that is made by the mother. So, this probiotic strain is very, very important. And just think that in infants, it is also helping them be calm and relaxed by getting enough good enough levels of GABA. So, it is keeping the infant in a relaxed state. The bacteria is coming from the mother. It is helping the baby digest the milk, which the baby cannot digest on its own, by the way. It requires the help from this bacteria. And then
And
it is
also
helping the
probably,
baby be calm and composed by producing good enough levels of GABA. So, how amazing is that?
and also it helps in the cognitive development of the baby,
Yes,
right?
that too. That it is going to help with this neuroprotective effect. It is going to help with the intestinal health. It is protective for intestinal health. It is going to help the baby produce the mucus and help absorb all of the nutrients that are going to come from the food that the baby is going to eat. So it is setting the tone for reducing inflammation, for all of these wonderful protective effects right at the beginning. That is the first strain any baby should receive from the mother. So how amazing is that evolution? And then when we talk
Yes.
about other fermented foods which have the lacto-fermented vegetables or fruits that we talk about, these bacteria are again bringing their own set of GAD genes, the glutamate decarboxylase genes. They are going to help us make good enough GABA from the food that we eat. So these fermented foods are extremely important for consumption. That is a very good reason why we should consume fermented fruits, vegetables, especially the ones that have these lactobacilli.
Very interesting. And I mean, we are having all this, information with us now that so much research is being done. And it's really amazing how nature works its way. But we need to take care of it. Like we always take care of the diversity in your gut microbiota. It solves most of your health issues. Now, usually with probiotics, we have something that we, help the microorganisms in our gut to, to actually synthesize those fibers to converting into something useful for us. So, in case of GABA, I recently read that it has also a different set of prebiotics coming from, the live organisms, other organisms. So, can you explain that? I'm a little confused there.
Yes, so when we talk about probiotics are these live germs, just like the lactobacillus, bifidobacterium, bacteroids that I just talked about. So what they are doing is they are actually making the enzyme that helps us convert GABA. So this GABA then goes to the either acts on the vagus nerve directly or passes the blood-brain barrier, and then it acts on our brain and gives us that kind of function. But if we go back and look at the foods or the things that are helping these bacteria produce these enzymes, they are not just foods. They are also enzymes from other microorganisms like the amylases, the proteases, and all of these other enzymes that are made, that help digest the food, and that gives us the precursors that are required to produce GABA. So these microorganisms that precede this process are also called prebiotics. So this is very interesting that I've read this. This is, I think, the first mention that I saw of microorganisms themselves being prebiotics. So there are examples like aspergillus. There are some strains of aspergillus that produce these proteases, that produce these enzymes like lipases, amylases, cellulases. So what they do is they digest our food in such a way that it can be processed by lactobacilli, by bifidobacterium to GABA. That's why they are also very, very important, these other strains. And then the foods that we eat, fructooligosaccharides, the beta glucans, or anything that is rich in fiber is extremely important for production of GABA. These are the prebiotic foods. And just because you talked about prebiotics, I also want to mention that GABA is called a postbiotic because it is a metabolite of all of these processes. There are things
Yes.
in the food or the microorganisms in the beginning, which are the prebiotics. Then there are the probiotics, which are the bacteria that are converting the food to GABA. And then there is GABA itself, which is a product of all of this process. So it's a postbiotic here.
Wonderful. I mean, it's really very interesting to know because so far we have been, listening to having prebiotic foods along with probiotic. But this time,
Yes,
for GABA, it needs a little more different kind of combination, wherein the
yes.
enzymes or the organisms act as prebiotics themselves, so that the further processes happen to generate GABA. Very unique kind of information there. So amazing information there. And then regarding supplements, GABA supplements are available, and some medications as well. So do you think that they are required, and why you
So
we
we have
should
talked
have?
about supplementation before. Since the research about GABA and the gut microbiome is quite new, and GABA supplements are not prescribed that commonly. Just like we talked about melatonin, it's one of the most common neurotransmitter supplements, probably. GABA is not that common, and it is very, very important to do it under medical supervision because it is going to control the firing of neurons. It is not something that should be taken over the counter or by yourself because it can have serious side effects. Like I told you, the chronic fatigue syndrome, or if the neurons do not get excited where they should, where they're controlled needlessly. Glutamate is required for our learning and memory. If there's too much of GABA, that is not going to happen. So supplementation is not something that is seen very commonly in case of GABA, and that is something that absolutely needs to be done only when necessary under medical supervision in all cases. So
Yeah,
it's
only in
definitely
some
different
cases
from
of
that.
epilepsy, I think, for
Yes, so
stopping
it is done
medication
under medical supervision because
under medical
epilepsy is not something to
supervision.
be taken very
Um,
lightly, and
yeah,
so these are the conditions that require GABA, but it has to be done completely under supervision as to whether the dose of GABA is right or whatever. It's not over the
right.
counter.
Yeah. So thank you, Rashmi, for this
So
amazing
if we talk
information.
about supplementation, we can also talk about the natural ways of getting
Yes,
GABA.
I was just coming to
So
that.
yes,
Yes. So after this information that you gave on GABA, I mean, and knowing that supplementation is not a very good idea, why do we need to have supplementation when we can naturally acquire some of the GABA, naturally develop GABA in our own body? We can look at five things: increasing vitamin B6 intake through vitamin B rich, 6 rich foods, and including, fermented foods, which naturally generate that kind of vitamin B and B6. They are good for your nerves, and they are good as for your, since this being a neuroprotective neurotransmitter, it is an important ingredient for us for the GABA production. Then magnesium rich foods as well. They're also pretty useful in kind of protecting us from having any of these neuro what to say, I won't say disorders, but issues with the nerves. So they are also that way very useful. Then exercise helps in GABA production, especially yoga. That has also been seen, through research that yoga has been very effective in developing GABA or producing GABA in our system. Getting enough sleep and meditation. Meditation, because part of the GABA is developed by the brain. So, calming the brain also helps in the production of GABA. So, you have anything to add to this, Rashmi?
Yes, so the ways that you talked about, the natural ways, are extremely important. So, when we talk about GABA being made in the brain and by the gut microbiome, we talk about neurotransmitters being made by the gut microbiome. So, why are the gut microbiome, the microbes, making it in the first place? So, they are living
Yes,
in this very acidic environment in our gut. It is anaerobic, it is extremely acidic. It is a protective agent for the bacteria themselves. So GABA is produced because they are trying to survive these conditions. That's why they make them. And in this process of survival, we are also getting benefited from the wonderful effects of GABA. So when we think about these fermented foods and how these bacteria are introduced in our gut through these foods, this is a survival skill or a survival thing that the bacteria themselves need. And when we talk about a good, diverse gut microbiome that has bacteroids, that has lactobacilli, that have bacteria, this bifidobacterium, they also need the support of other microorganisms. So, which means the trillions of microorganisms that we have in our gut need to be very good quality. They need to be functioning in coordination with each other. The microorganisms need to provide these probiotics with whatever enzymes they need to convert the food that they eat. So, fiber rich food is amazing for the microbiome. And as we will talk about later, short chain fatty acids are also made from these, and they are also amazing neurotransmitters. We'll talk about how GABA and these short chain fatty acids are linked in one of the next podcasts. So it is this interplay of all of these neurotransmitters that are made in our gut that are extremely important. They enter the bloodstream, and they are having all of these neuroprotective and cancer protective. They are having diabetic protection against diabetes, all of these things that they are offering. So it is very important to keep our gut health in good shape. It is important to keep our microbiome in good shape. So fermented foods are even more important here than, I mean, they are always important, but incorporating fermented foods in our daily diet are extremely important, not just for adults, but for children as well, because we all need a good dose of that break, the break on our nervous system. When we don't have enough GABA, it is not something that we consider very easily. It is not something
yes.
that we pay attention to, but we need good enough levels of GABA in our daily life.
Very,
So,
very interesting information there, Rashmi, especially the part how, it's unique in its production, GABA, in unique GABA production with the use of, other microorganisms as prebiotics. It's also a different perspective in terms of how these organisms actually produce GABA themselves for
yes.
their
So,
fight
do
or
you know,
flight
there's an
survival.
interesting thing I forgot to mention earlier. Actually, if we look at studies done on lean and obese individuals, now we talked about the different kinds of diseases, but even studies on lean and obese individuals have shown differences in the levels of GABA producing microorganisms. So, lean individuals have a lot more of the GABA producers, have a lot more of these GAD enzyme producing microorganisms than people who are obese. So when we talk about fecal microbiome transplant, when the feces or stools from lean individuals were transferred to obese individuals, they found that the GABA levels increased in these obese individuals. So it's not just being lean or obese, it also regulates the state of our mind. Having those kind of bacteria in our gut, they are also going to regulate how we feel. So our overall health is linked. We need to consider not just our weight, but also the state of our mind. That's why we say that our physical, mental, and emotional health is all linked to the health of our gut microbiome. Yet most
Very
people don't know. the gut microbiome is. So if you have not heard about it yet, please go back to our videos, our playlist on the microbiome. Please take a look at what the gut microbiome is. You will be
Yes,
shocked to see how many important things it does. So that is something
yes.
that everybody absolutely needs to be aware of.
We
There are
are
many, many other
constantly
studies
trying.
of fecal microbiome transplant done on various diseases, which have shown that when these GABA producing microorganisms were transplanted to deceased individuals, GABA production was increased. Even giving probiotics of lactobacillus or bifidobacterium improved the GABA levels. So fermented foods is just a very, very easy solution for increasing the diversity and for increasing the amount of GABA produced in our body.
I always remember how that bowl of curd rice or dahi chawal would always, give me that calming effect whenever I had it on an afternoon, hot afternoon probably.
Yeah,
But
there's a
it
good reason
always,
why it's a comfort food.
yes, it's a comfort food because of that. Yes. So a lot of things there, and we are on a continuous attempt to create awareness regarding the various neurotransmitters, how they are impacted by the gut microbiota, and we're looking at a lot of people undergoing stress, anxiety, depression. Children are having problems with anger, depressive attitudes, or ADHD, and being aggressive. We think that these are very important topics that you all need to tune in and listen to on our podcast. Please visit our channel and have a look at all the different videos that we have posted. You'll find them very interesting, and maybe you will be able to find a solution to some of your problems. So thank you very much, Rashmi, for that wonderful information. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Sujata.
Stay calm, stay cool.
Yes.
Bye.
So, viewers, if you are having trouble staying calm, composed, if you see this kind of a behavior in children where they are always restless, where they are aggressive, and you are at your wits' end trying to figure out what could be going wrong, it could just be something as simple as imbalance of gamma aminobutyric acid, which can be fixed very easily with fermented foods, with a healthy lifestyle. Do get in touch with us for more such details. If you have not subscribed to our channel, do it right away. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel. So, thank you. We'll see you in the next one.